you're not familiar with Zoom, you probably just got a message about the recording. Go ahead and let it know that you acknowledge this meeting is being recorded. All right, welcome to the Foodwell Alliance and the Law Farms webinar series, the Farm Law webinar series. This month, August 2021, we're talking local government and zoning. And this is part of a series. So if you missed June, July, or wait, this is August. If you've missed June or July, they are at the lawfarm, FARM.com under the 2021 webinar series link. June, we talked about agritourism and on-farm waivers.
I've sent out frequent communication and
in July, we talked about contracts and agreements. This month, we're talking about local government and zoning. Next month, we're going to be talking about trademarks, copyright, and more, how intellectual property affects mostly farm businesses. We'll touch a little bit on food generally, and if you know any entrepreneurs in general, this is a great overview of intellectual property in general. That will be on September 20th. Then in October, we're talking about conservation tax benefits. But I think I'm also going to throw some other tax issues in there in general, just to kind of go over the legal aspect of tax and farm entrepreneurship. In November, we're going to talk about employees and volunteers and some of the legal implications and guidance for those folks on a farm. And in December, we're going to do an overhaul of entrepreneur law. That's a kind of a downtime for farmers. It's a little bit more slow than July or August. And it's a good time to just make sure that from cradle to grave, your business is set up with a solid legal foundation that you want it to have. And that'll round out the year. And again, I welcome you. I welcome you. If you don't already have something, I suggest having something to take notes. The first thing to write down is go ahead and dump everything on your mind right now, all those last minute Monday to-dos, all the things you're worried about. We're going to cover a lot tonight. Be present with me. Make sure you can catch all this stuff. This might feel a little bit like drinking out of a water hose. I'm here to help. And don't feel any pressure to keep your camera on. If you do, your thumbnail might make it into the recording, but no need to keep it on. Make sure you're muted when you're not speaking, please. I will take questions at the end. I welcome you to type questions as they come up in the chat, but I'll add the disclaimer that it's a little difficult to juggle the chat with the other materials I'm going through, so it might take me a minute to see your question, but I will eventually get to it. When we're going through the resources that I'm going to show you tonight, I definitely suggest just taking yourself off of mute if you're following along and you get stuck. And also, if you want to take a second, if you didn't hear me at the beginning, and go ahead and set yourself up so that you can be in this Zoom meeting, but also have access to another internet browser, if that's a possibility for you. Set that up so that you can follow through with some of the resources I'm going to show in a little while. And of course, I'm a lawyer, so I come with a disclaimer. This presentation is not meant to provide legal advice. A lawyer's favorite answer is it depends, because it does depend. There's a lot of nuance in the law and how it applies to specific scenarios and situations. I don't have the context to give you that today, nor would I want to in a room full of folks. I would want to meet with you one-on-one and really talk about what you need legal advice on and what that's going to entail. So this presentation does not provide legal advice. This presentation will provide you with legal information and education. It will guide you to transform dense law into clear action steps. I think that's a really vital skill for starting entrepreneurs to at least become somewhat good at, not proficient or expert level, but just have a grasp of that. And this presentation will empower you to integrate legal tools into your farm infrastructure, your farm business infrastructure. And no attorney-client relationship is created in this webinar. When we leave this evening, our legal education relationship is done, and there is no confidentiality preserved with what you share. When you meet with an attorney, generally one-on-one, you what you tell them is protected in confidence. When we're in a group setting like this, it's lost automatically. So when you do ask questions about what you have going on, especially if there's a chance there's conflict involved in it, keep questions very high level and preserve those details for those one-on-one confidential moments. So tonight, we're going to cover the different levels of law and how they interplay together. So we have federal laws, state laws, local laws that all affect what we can and cannot do. I'm going to use the example of produce sales tax exemptions to illustrate this issue, mostly because I think that produce sales tax exemption piece is important for farmers, and there are misconceptions and confusions around that generally. So we'll go ahead and talk about that here, and I'll be able to take some questions if anybody has them. Then we're going to talk about how to determine what a property is zoned for and what that means, all the implications. So you can make sure you legally run your business on your property. Make sure you're doing things that are allowed on a piece of property. And then know what happens if you use your property for an unlawful use. As we get into the meat of this, you'll realize sometimes with zoning, it's very easy to break the law without realizing that you're doing so, or without doing so with any intention. It's, to me, I think, interesting to tease out so often in layman's terms, doing something illegal is related with doing something criminal. But when it comes to these local ordinances, you can be doing something illegal, but it's just civilly illegal. And I say just, but it's still illegal. And you want to be making sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's. And we want to be making sure that our communities and our local governments understand what farmers are doing, what farm businesses are working towards, and what that looks like to have sustainable farming in these urban and suburban environments. And then we'll talk about the process to change a local law. And we'll talk about the Forest Park case study, which is interesting. That was a case I had the opportunity to represent, where a farm stand at an early childhood education center was shut down by the local government, and we were able to write zoning code and have it adopted into the Forest Park Code so that that doesn't happen again to folks who are leaders on a national level with farm to school programming. And then we're going to talk about practical tips for seeking code changes. It's a very human, personal, up close and personal endeavor when it comes to the local government. So there's some practical tips that I think are important just to keep in mind generally. So let's jump into the different levels of law, kind of a quick overview. And I'll use the produce sales tax exemption just to highlight how things play out at different levels. So federal, state, and local laws determine the taxes you pay every year. The federal tax code governs federal taxes. The Georgia tax code governs state taxes. And then county and city codes govern local taxes that are implemented. For sales tax in general, there's nothing in our federal tax code that deals with sales tax. It is a state issue. The states have their own rules from state to state on how sales tax will be managed, levied, collected, all of those details. And for the Georgia tax code, there is a produce sales tax exemption. So on the state level, farmers do not have to pay sales tax for the produce that they sell, as long as it is in its raw produce form. As soon as it becomes a prepared food, that changes. And then county and city codes govern local taxes. So even though produce sales tax is exempted at the state level, some counties and local governments still require that tax to be paid. Fortunately, I do not know offhand exactly which of those are, but we'll talk about how you can work with me at office hours, and we could figure out if any of the places where you're selling produce do or don't have that tax exemption. And then the Georgia Department of Revenue site is very helpful with teasing out which local governments there are exemptions for and which there are not. And I'm going to pause here and I want to show you this right here. You might be able to see my mouse. I can't highlight while I'm in. Okay, so the Georgia code where it says that, and then there's a little squiggly line, that symbol is a code section. So it's Georgia code section 48-8-3, section 12, where this comes up, this exemption. And I want to show real quick how you find a code section, if it's ever referenced, if it ever comes up, how you find a code section, what to look for, how to make sure you have the most recent one. So I'm just going to highlight Georgia Code section 48-8-3. And I'm going to go to my internet. And if I just put it into my search browser, this first option that it takes me to, law.justia.com, is a phenomenal resource just for finding the code section that you're talking about, for finding code language on the state level for sure. Sometimes I use it for federal. And when you pull it up, for no reason that I understand, the 2010 Georgia code always comes up first. And it's not the most current Georgia code. But up here, right above where you have this title of the code, you can view the 2019 Georgia code. And it brings you back to this overwhelming list, table of contents, of all the laws in Georgia. But we can use the code section we had before. It was 48. So it's talking about Title 48 -8-3. So the 8 corresponds to the chapter, but this is where you lose where the numbers correspond. Now I'm going to open up the article. I'm going to open up general provisions. And I see just at the beginning, this is where 48-8-1, -2, and -3 are. -3 is what we're looking for. So that last little number sometimes is a guess and check. It just have to click on one of the articles and one of the parts and just kind of get an idea of what numbers they range to and narrow it down to the code section you're looking for. So we're looking for 48-8-3, the exemptions to state sales and use tax. When I click on it, and I believe it was section 12, yes. And I scroll down to 12, food and food ingredients and prepared food sold and served to pupils and employees of public schools. So food and food ingredients are the sales and use taxes levied or imposed by this article shall not apply to those food or food ingredients. And maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, but I think that knowing the code section and knowing the language in a law is so powerful. It removes the guesswork. It removes the conversation to an extent. Of course, lawyers argue over the language all the time and what is or isn't falling under things. But for the most part, looking up a code section, seeing the actual language, the actual words, is an incredibly powerful tool to just know that you know what you're talking about when you're going into conversations about these sorts of things. So this Justia site is one I use often for finding Georgia code, and that's the deal on produce tax exemptions. Oh. All right, and then just practical tips in general. I don't want to go off on a whole tangent. I will talk about this produce exemption again when I talk about tax issues for farmers, but just some practical considerations are that the Georgia Department of Revenue is the place where all local sales tax payments are made. So it's in one convenient spot, even though it could change or vary between local jurisdictions. It's funneled through the State Department of Revenue site. And they have online features to create a profile and keep track of your business's sales and each county and location that you sell produce at. And you can even upload Excel spreadsheets with the county information on it to the website directly. And this tool will help your bookkeeping, your pricing, and just general record keeping. I believe that records are your first line of defense if anything comes up in your business. And the tools that the Department of Revenue offers for the sales tax are multi-use in a way. They're tools that can also efficiently help you with that bookkeeping, pricing, and general record keeping. One more note on the levels of laws is that laws must be in line with the Constitution that governs that jurisdiction. So on the federal level, all laws must be in line with the United States Constitution. On a state level, all laws must also be in line with the state constitution. And then when it comes to zoning code specifically, zoning code, not all local code, but zoning code, all decisions must be in line with the comprehensive plan. And we'll look at a comprehensive plan together later. But it's important to note, if you've ever heard of a city being sued or the state being sued over a law or the federal government being sued over a law they're making, there's usually a constitutional argument there that even though they created the law, it's not a valid law because it's outside of the bounds of the Constitution. So when we go through how you figure out what the local code is, and then what if you need to change it, at the very last resort, if a law is unconstitutional on the level that you're exploring, there is a possibility of a lawsuit there. Keep in mind. All right, let's dive right into examining local codes more closely. Zoning laws are the local laws that govern how a property or an area is used. If it's not in the zoning code, it's not legal. To make that more concrete, if a local code does not mention chickens or keeping chickens in any way, if you have chickens, it's illegal in a sense. If it's not affirmatively mentioned in a zoning code as a use, it may be something that code enforcement can put a squash to. And local code enforcement responds to code violations, either ones that they see or code violations that are reported by others. And they're usually the same governing body that will follow up on compliance and deal with the issue further if it continues to be one. And some code violations are civil and some are criminal. I don't know of any zoning code violation that is criminal. I don't know of it. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But I think it's important to know that distinction in general, just to understand the consequences of certain actions. And then we're going to, right now, in real time, I want y'all to come with me and let's go through the 3 steps of determining the applicable zoning code for a piece of property. And there's 3 general steps to doing this. The first is to locate the property on a map. Just know where your property is. Then determine the zoning designation that applies to that property. And then you will take that zoning designation that applies to the property and go find it in the code and see what it says about the uses for that piece of property. I hope everyone's ready. We're jumping right on in. Okay. Finding out how a property is zoned. Step 1, locate the property on a map. You can use your map on your phone, the GPS. You can use a map on a computer. You can use a map on any internet browser. But just locate the property and get an idea of whether or not it's in a municipal city, or if it's in an unincorporated county area, or I think those are pretty much the two options. And so for this activity together, I just chose the address 970 Grant Street Southeast, Atlanta, Georgia. It's the address of the Grant Park Community Garden. And I would do the step already where I would just see that it is in fact in the city of Atlanta. And that's an easy Google search. If you're curious about jurisdictions, you can just Google the jurisdiction itself, get the boundaries, and then you can see where a property lies more exactly. And if there's ever any question, calling the local municipality, either the city or the county itself, they often know where their boundaries are to help out, or they can find someone who can help you with that. And then you go to the local government website and find the GIS maps associated with the property. GIS maps have a definition or it's an acronym, and now I'm losing what the acronym is. But the GIS maps give you information about different plots of land. So when I go to the City of Atlanta's website, and I'm here, there's all sorts of links to things. There's a whole lot going on, especially with the City of Atlanta. It's a big city. But I want to keep an eye out for zoning, development, permitting, and those sorts of words on this very busy website. And then I find zoning and permitting basics. Y'all, this searching and researching and everything, I tell you, I have gone through this stuff multiple times to get this in order. So let this be a sign to you that if you feel frustrated while you're searching for something on a local government site or in a local government code section or anything, you're not the only one who has that frustration. You're not alone. You can do this. Deep breaths, keep looking. Hold on. See. I have screenshots of the zoning map, but I did want to show you guys exactly how to get to the. Okay, here we go. Research a property. That should have, there we go. And then GIS maps. And Geographic Information System, that's what that stands for. And so you would go to the property info interactive map or the zoning map, either one, and you would find your property. It's 970 Grant Street Southeast, brings me straight to it. And then I can access the zoning map by hitting more info, and then boom, this is just a section of the official zoning map. And it's really nice that the GIS maps and technology allow us just to bring this up directly. The only, just the relevant part is nice. And so then I would search through this to find my exact parcel. I think it's very helpful to pull up a GPS map and to look at this map because it doesn't have the clear street names and everything that makes it easy to locate it. So I pull up another map and try and look at the landmarks and the flow and kind of zero in on my spot. I do know from looking before that it's somewhere around here. And I'll do a zoom in just a second. But as you can see, there's different colors and they correspond to this legend. So all of this yellow color is, hold on, my participant tiles is this sort of residential type of property. And then you've got this bright purple, and that is mixed use property. And I see these M's here, and then I see the blue, and it's industrial, and it has eyes. So I kind of have ways to just check and double check that I'm looking in the right area. And let me go back to the PowerPoint. So we determined There we go. Now we're determining the zoning designation itself. Here's my 970. It's right there in the center of that screenshot. That's a screenshot of the map we were just looking at. But when I zoom back out a little bit, my 970 is still kind of towards the center here. We see that this color coordinates with this zoning designation, R-5-C. We'll note that. And then we move again. We pivot to the actual city code of Atlanta to figure out what it means to have a property that's zoned R-5-C. We've gathered a lot of information, got to go get more. And I'm going to switch my sharing again. And actually, this is an incredible resource. If you need codes, local codes in general, this is the resource for you to bookmark and come back to regularly. This is library.municode.com. They have a library of all the municipal codes in the country, easily at our fingertips. Thank you, technology. So I'll click on the state of Georgia, and when I do, it's going to list all the cities and the counties for Georgia. Any local code you will need to access is likely on here. If it's not, it probably will be soon. If it's not, you have to go to the actual local government's website and it should be there. If it's not there, call them up. But this is a great place to start. And we are talking about the city of Atlanta. So we're going to go into their code. There's a search bar up at the top of the MuniCode website that is sometimes helpful, sometimes not. It's worth playing around with though, especially in a farming context or in a food business context, or any specific business really. If you put in keywords for your business in general, it's going to pull up code sections that are relevant to you. And I think that's worthwhile just in general to kind of do an overview of the code sections that may apply to you that nobody has brought to your attention yet, that there's no way of knowing until you do that combing through. So let's see, this is the table of contents here of the actual code of ordinances. And we'll go to land development, and then I see zoning. And then I see these R dashes, and remember we had R-5-C. I don't see any R's that have the C. It goes into O's, but I'm going to start with just this R-5 and see what that's all about. The R-5 tells me that this is a two-family residential district regulation. It gives me the scope of the provision. What was the what is the big picture of having this residential or this two-family residential district? It gives a statement of intent as well, just a little bit more background. And then it gives the permitted principal uses and structures and permitted accessory uses and structures. Now keep in mind, I found the address of an actual community garden. So we would hope we would find something on these permitted uses about gardening. And sure enough, when we get into the accessory uses, urban gardens is right there. And more specifically for this plot, it is since it's not built up on, it was allowed to be an urban garden as well. That's going into the ag code. We'll talk about that in a second. But if I lived there, if there was a house and that was where I lived and I was curious, am I allowed to have an urban garden here? I would come here, I would see that it's permitted as an accessory use. And then I may be curious what that means to be an accessory use versus a permitted principal use. And that's where you can dive further into the code, which you guys have access to me after this. So I'm going to move on from there. And if that's a question, ask it at the end in the Q&A, or we can have an office hour and sit down and talk about it together. But there we go. I now know that on this property, there's all these accessory uses. This is what I'm allowed to do. I'm empowered with that information of what I can and can't do. Okay, before I read this, I'm gonna check oh, Donna was on it. I see in the chat where she put the zoning map down. Thank you. And I see a question, is honey considered a raw produce? That is a good question, Charles. I'm not sure, but that's something we can look into together. I'll talk about office hours at the end, but if you do need to go, I'm going to put the link to schedule an office hour with me right in here. For any farmers or food entrepreneurs in the for farmers in the 5-county area, if you're in the Food Well Alliance community, these office hours are completely free. If you are outside of that community, I'm only charging $75 for office hours for webinar participants, which is a huge discount. Take advantage of it. If you have questions like that, is honey considered a raw produce? I'm not sure. I would need to look further into that. So there's the Calendly link if you want to set up an office hour with us. All right, so homeowners associations and other contracts can still control what you can do on your property. Even if you've looked at the zoning code and you see I'm allowed to have this urban garden, I've looked at the definition of urban garden, and there's always a definition section in the code that you can go to see more about it. But there still could be other contracts or covenants that affect what you can do on a piece of property. HOAs or homeowners associations govern what can happen on some properties. It's a contract or a covenant that is bound usually in condos, townhomes, and planned communities. And when you purchase the property, you're bound by the rules of that homeowners association. This is important to keep in mind for if you're purchasing land, make sure that you're not bound by any of those sorts of requirements in addition to doing your zoning code checks. And land leases. If you're going to lease property from somebody, again, you want to do your due diligence to make sure that there isn't a covenant or a homeowners association or any other agreement between the landowner and anyone else that can affect your ability to do what you would like to do on a piece of property. And also keep in mind that signing leases with cities and other landowners, especially large corporations, could change the prescribed use of a property. I believe with the Aglanta Grows a Lot program, you sign a contract with the city of Atlanta and Georgia Power, who has the easement on those properties. So reading over the leases that they give you is vital. Know exactly the contract terms you're subject to and the consequences if they're not followed. Know those things before you sign a lease. And I will say in those instances in instances like that Grow a Lot program, where you're signing contracts with not only a city, but also a very established company, it's worth your while to find an attorney. If it's not me, if it's not the office hours, if it's outside that scope, it's worth the investment. You're putting in a lot of time and effort and energy into that Grow a Lot program and investing a little bit more just to make sure that your understanding of the agreement is what's being presented to you and there's nothing extra or nothing being taken away. It's just having knowledge is power. Having knowledge is power. So find an attorney, because the city of Atlanta and Georgia Power both have a team of attorneys looking over those contracts and agreement. Your business should also have the guidance of counsel when entering into those agreements. All right. And then what happens if you need to change code? Sometimes, if you haven't come to the Law Farm webinar, you may be excited about a new endeavor that you can take on. Actually, let me check. Before I go into this case study, Are there any questions? I'm going to check the chat one more time. Oh, great question. Yes, let's go back to Municode. What is the process for applying for a conditional zoning allowance? Conditional zoning is an involved process. It's all outlined in the code. I would say for conditional zoning, you may want to find legal counsel specifically to guide you. But that is a great question to look at how codes themselves have so much of the process written within them. Thank you, Delroy, for that question. What is the process for applying for a conditional zoning allowance? I am going to not answer that question directly, but in a similar way. Let me switch over. I see another question about taxes coming in. Give me 1 second. Okay, so what I have in this browser window is let me scroll up. It's the Atlanta Urban Ag Code as it was adopted in 2014. So this is an amended ordinance, it's a zoning issue, and all this entire document outlines Atlanta's urban ag ordinance. It was a huge chunk of legislation or code. It was, and to me, as someone who was in law school at the time and researching various municipalities and cities' approach to urban ag, this was very cutting edge. This to go ahead and take on this recognition that folks are trying to grow food differently in the way they grow food and where they do it at. And the city was very proactive in deciding what would be allowed and what wouldn't be allowed. And they added to section 16-25.002 of the zoning ordinance to be amended to allow these special administrative permits. Okay. So there's a couple moving parts here. Let me make sure I'm clear on each individual one. So the city adopted this urban ag ordinance, which amended a lot of different code sections within all the language of this ordinance. So a lot of different sections in when we go to Municode here, a lot of these sections were changed just a little bit or maybe a lot by this urban ag ordinance that was passed. One of the sections that was changed was in the special administrative permit section, which is section 16-25. Let me go back. Oh, look, I'm there. Okay. All right, so I'm still, where did I come from to give context? Okay, I had to scroll down very far in the zoning stuff and I got to chapter 25, special permits. And then I found this 16-25.002 and it said that the change, adding a new item 5 as follows. So I'm now in the current codes, and I know that special administrative permits are required for urban gardens as a principal use in a residential district. This is the power right here. This is the knowledge you want. So even with a conditional zoning issue, there is code in there somewhere. I'll do a quick little search after I talk about this special administrative permit and see if I can find the conditional zoning language for you too, just to show you while we're here. But let me go through how much information this gives you and how useful it is. So it says, it tells me when the permit expires, so how long it will last. And this is the exact manner of how I go about getting one of those issued to me. It gives me any code section. Ooh, I love Municode. Look at that little bubble that pops up giving me context. That is so nice. So it tells me the code sections that also play a role in this that aren't listed specifically. So you can go and read through those as well. And it tells you you need a site plan with the following, and you can just create a checklist for yourself where you get your exact lot dimensions, check. Find your adjoining streets, check. And go through this almost like a rubric when we were in school and we got those rubrics for all the assignments teachers gave us. This is the this is a city, not a county. This is the city's rubric for getting that special use permit. And so it tells you you need a management plan and an impact analysis. And it tells you exactly item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of what that means. It tells you what it would entail if you wanted to transfer a permit. It tells you how long the permit lasts. The implications of removing structures. What happens if you're denied or suspended for any reason? Is this still? No, that was it for the urban garden. So it outlines exactly what's required. I'm gonna say 2 things to pivot off of this too. 1, you can always call your local government and ask them for assistance in these issues. They usually have people who deal with them regularly who know what the process is. So I say that your local government's there to work for you. You pay your business tax to be there. So get to know them, say hello, check in, let them know what you're up to, and see how they may be able to be of assistance. So I definitely say forge those relationships with your local government. Feel free to use them as a resource. And then I always offer the caveat of just having that knowledge in your back pocket, though. I wouldn't go to them blindly asking, because it happens so often that folks who do the same thing regularly sometimes forget about a vital piece being important or that it needs to be communicated. That's just a human error in general, nothing to point a finger at anyone for doing. But knowing the code up front, making yourself an actual bullet checklist out of that code and going by that, and then calling your local office to make sure you're on the right track sets you up in an incredible way to be doing the right thing, knowing what you're doing, and be able to take it one step at a time as you're managing the million other juggling pieces that go on as an entrepreneur. So the code specifically lays out everything you need to do. Let me see about what happens if I just look up conditional zoning. And keep in mind, it brings up that section. Some of the language from jurisdiction to jurisdiction between cities and counties can be a little bit different. It may be a conditional zoning allowance versus a conditional zoning permit. And again, looking at the code gives you exactly what language is being used and where it's being used. So boom, we would go to section 16-02, .003, conditional zoning. It explains, there's that suffix C that was after our R-5 too. Thank you, Delroy, for bringing that home as well. All zoning districts, as shown on the official zoning map with a suffix C after them, denote that a parcel is zoned conditional under previous ordinance amendments. Okay, so here we go again. It tells you what an applicant may do. It gives you exactly what it's looking for in that application. It tells you how those plans should be prepared. It talks about the actual processes. So there are decision bodies in multiple points in a local government issue. And in this case, they're talking about the zoning review board being a part of that. And then after approval of that, it's going to go to mayor and council. So this part 7 right there, that's a hefty paragraph. But taking the time, have a cup of coffee, sit back, look at each sentence, make it that bullet point list. Here is the answer to your question, Delroy, right here in the code. And keep in mind that this is City of Atlanta, so you would want to go back to that original map and then Georgia and then find another jurisdiction if it's not Atlanta that you're looking for that specific information for, Delroy? Great question. Okay, and I see another question. We're interested in farming produce and solar. Is solar taxed differently? I am assuming you are talking about property taxes. And I think the answer, yeah. So I think offhand, and let me remind you, there is going to be a conservation tax benefit webinar in November. In November, I will do a webinar that will go over all of those issues. But I believe, and this is coming with lots of caveats if I have not brushed up on that for this, but I believe that solar farming is a conservation use. I think. I do not know for sure. But yes, come back in November or schedule an office hour with me before then, and we can find out for sure on that issue. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, any other questions before I go into what happened in Forest Park and how they took away the children's farm stands? We made it happen again. All right, we'll move right along. Okay. The Little Ones Learning Center was engaged in farm to school leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean on the national level. Wande Okunoran Meadows and her mother, who own Little Ones Learning Center, are incredibly involved with farm to school, with sustainable agriculture. They use it in their curriculum with their students, and in the local food world, that is nothing but celebrated. That is so exciting. It is cutting edge. It's an actual tangible realization of the sorts of programming that local food groupies like myself dream of and are there to support. So they grew food on the campus and they sold produce once a week to mostly students' families. And the produce that they sold, they obtained from local farms that were in the metro Atlanta area. They used a food hub to get local sustainable produce for this farm stand once a week for just a couple of hours. And they sold mostly to students' families. It felt wholesome, it felt on point and on par with the missions of local food and like a great endeavor. And then one farm stand day, so they had the farm stand up and Wande's staff put it up every week, took care of all this in addition to taking care of teaching children and making sure they're safe and all those other things. This was in addition because of the value it added to the students and the families' experience and to the community at large, setting an example for how we can like start chipping away at this food desert and this hunger problem. It's a serious issue in our communities. And one farm stand day, they're selling produce as usual. Code enforcement stopped by to shut down the operations because a farm stand was not allowed on the property. Let me back up again and say that this was not a huge commercial endeavor. This was a passion project to add to the education of the students themselves and community, the families and the communities at large. This was something that barely broke even every week, but it was worth it to keep it going because of the other values it had to Wande, to Little Ones Learning Center, and to the folks who were stakeholders in this farm stand. The farm stands weren't allowed on the property, so code enforcement came, they shut it down. They had to bring the tent down, bring the coolers in. It was over and they had gotten a ticket. They were in trouble. And that's terrifying to me to find out that I'm doing something that I believe in like this. And I just found out I was breaking the law and just got a notice of that. They shut it down and they continued not hosting the farm stand, which I believe is so wise. If you do find out that you're doing something that's not legal on your property and somebody brings it to your attention, just shut it down for a little while. There are maybe exceptions to that if you will lose your entire business by shutting it down, but those exceptions are should definitely be talked about with legal counsel before that decision is made. Otherwise, when you're told it's illegal, shut it down. And Little Ones Learning Center's leadership stepped up to address this issue with City Council. And the grassroots efforts to bring the farm stand back were met with confusing City Council rules. It wasn't clear at what point of City Council, what meetings they should bring this up at, who was allowed to speak, when they were allowed to speak. It was very, all the moving parts felt very confusing. In addition to uneducated city leaders, and I do not mean uneducated generally, these are very intelligent, educated people. But when I say uneducated in that context, I'm talking about in local food in general or sustainable, hyper sustainable food. And I do believe that a lot of the novel food enterprise endeavors are cutting edge. And even though, like in my community, having a law firm that does business as the Law Farm and working with Food Well Alliance and working with Georgia Organics and working with the leaders in local food, we talk about these things ad nauseum. We know the ins and outs of all the prongs of benefits that come from local food, sustainable food, teaching how to grow food to our children, to our students, all of that. That's the conversation is nothing but that. But when it comes to city leadership, there's no telling what their background is. It could be a rocket scientist who knows a lot about a lot, but maybe not about sustainable food and why, and local food and why. So city leaders who were uneducated on the value of this farm stand in terms of community and sustainability, and then personal frustrations about not being able to continue this novel leadership effort, especially in the case of the Little Ones farm stands, was just that it wasn't making a whole lot of money. This wasn't something Wande was doing to be able to pay her bills and take care of things. This is something she just wanted to do as a teaching lesson because it was important, because there's value there, in different ways than monetary. And it's incredibly frustrating to find out that you've put your heart and soul into this very time consuming endeavor, and now you're told you can't do it. So I stepped in. The law office of Michelle Namer was hired via the Emory's environmental law clinic. And I feel like that's important to say too, because there are resources out there in the legal realm before hiring an attorney. The environmental law clinic, a teeny tiny percentage of the work that they do is devoted to local food and sustainable ag. It falls in line with their mission, but they do a small percentage of that. So they had reached out to the Emory Environmental Clinic. They referred Wande to me, and I was able to work with Wande and step in, and we drafted code language to offer the city attorney. We presented the code to the Planning Commission, and we worked with City Council to obtain approval for new code language. The drafting, let me see, I think I'll go to the next slide and talk about the practical tips of what that would look like if you were doing that yourself. But we were met with first a lot of tensions because this case did reach national status. It was in the media at the national level, and it made Forest Park look very bad for shutting down this farm stand. And so City Council and the mayor and the Planning Commission were rightfully kind of on guard a little bit because they were being painted in such a bad light. And there was a lot of emotion on the Little One side of, we just had this farm stand, we're doing the right thing, how could you shut this down? So there was a lot of emotion, and there was a lot of clarity to be had. When the leaders that we started talking to, when we started talking to the city attorney and some of the other staff, there was this concern of having something that was labeled a farm stand, but then had wild misuse in the end, where people were selling, it goes from farm stand, but then you have beauty supplies being sold out of a trunk, or another issue like that. And we had to do the education piece of, no, this is not turning into a flea market. This is not turning into a garage sale. This is about produce and showing children and families and communities how you grow it and then how you make it available to others, involving SNAP and EBT and all of those educational pieces. So we had those conversations, and it became very apparent that when we all sat down together to get on the same page with that aim, it was very simple to do so. And I'm grateful for that. And there were lots of questions about food safety. That seems to be an issue around novel uses when it comes to farming and produce stands and the like. There seem to be a lot of food safety issues. Where is the food coming from? How do we know it's going to be decent food? How do we know it's going to follow all the rules? And again, it was an education of, there are governing bodies that deal with that already. The Department of Agriculture, the federal food safety rules, those safeguards are in place already. And I was able to work with them to alleviate those worries. They had valid concerns, valid worries about the health and safety of their communities, of their constituents. And being able to show what Wande was doing and why made it very easy for us to go through that process, get everyone on the same page, and have that code language adopted to be able to open the farm stand back up. And it is open back even after the pandemic. There was a grand opening a few months ago. And so it's a great story with a great ending. And it, to me, highlights that a local code is not a make it or break it situation. Local government is a place where we have access to get involved, and we can make change, and we can adjust things that aren't working for the new and exciting things that can work. And I just want to talk about practical tips in this realm. We've already talked about MuniCode, the library.municode resource. You can always use that to figure out the exact process. You can meet with me in an office hour. You can hire an attorney. But I think these practical tips are really important and worthwhile sharing from the experience that we had in Forest Park. First thing to point out is that for many local food enterprise leaders, these novel endeavors are a passion, and they're connected to more than just a bottom line. So it's not always about money. It's about values. It's about how we're using land. It's about how we're growing food that's going to be consumed. It's about doing things differently for a very purpose-driven reason. And I love that about local food. That's why I'm here talking to you. That's why I love meeting with new farmers and farmtrepreneurs and food business folks, is because I get it. This is about more than just the bottom line. But not everybody gets that, especially when it comes to the government decision-making bodies. Value in our governmental bodies is defined differently than how we might define value if we're at a Georgia Organics conference talking over lunch. It just is. And I don't want to say that to give credit or discredit to either of those. It's just different. So it's important to remember that a lot of food enterprise leaders are coming to this with passion, with that heart, and it's not always met on the other end. Just keep that in mind. And navigating local government can become frustrating without keeping it in mind that other folks just have different questions and just have a different value lens. And navigating local government can bring up specific wounds and triggers in the realm of being heard, being understood, and being appreciated. If any of those three needs of being heard, understood, and appreciated is lacking at all, and you go up to city council to have to deal with it, it can be very emotional and very rightfully so. So keeping that on mind gives you the ability to honor those frustrations and be prepared for them to come up. Know the structure of your local government and don't be afraid to ask questions. This goes back to earlier when I was saying, know the code. The code gives you so much information already to kind of get sea legs in this, and then ask questions where you're not sure and continue to manage that. Like, this is a frustrating process sometimes. Deep breath. Do what you have to do to keep moving forward in that. And then know how to communicate the value of your work to non-farmers. So when we go outside in the world to places where folks don't have the deep conversations that we have about sustainability and local food and food deserts, some of those words are completely foreign to lay people. So know how to communicate exactly like all the different prongs of benefits that local food can have and how each of those prongs serves the needs that the local government is also looking for. We're going to look at a comprehensive plan in a second to kind of talk about how you form those arguments. And then know how your enterprise, there we go. Look, I set myself up better than I even remembered I had. Know how your enterprise goals and missions line up with the comprehensive plan of the local government. So let me show you an example. The comprehensive plan is something you can always find on a local government's website. I know sometimes there are different levels of accessibility for the urban cities and the metro cities and the rural cities, but you should be able to find this or at least contact someone who can email you a comprehensive plan to look at or a copy of the comprehensive plan. And this comprehensive plan is the constitution of all the zoning code rules that a local government makes. Where is, oh wait, excuse me. And it is a long document. This is 77 pages of comprehensive plan for Forest Park. And I've already skipped ahead to page 29, where they list their goals and their policies. And generally a comprehensive plan is done with a comprehensive plan, like consultant group. And they tend to make them very visually accessible. It's not like going through the zoning code where it is nothing but dense language and you just have to like carefully line up the code sections. No, the comprehensive plans are usually set out with tables and colors and pictures and graphics and all sorts of things that kind of make it a little bit easier to digest as a document. But then I come down here, I scrolled ahead to page 29 because it has community opportunities. So the local government is using this document as its guidance to make zoning decisions. And they list their goals specifically and policies that go along with that. So when I say know the value of what you're doing and be able to communicate it in line with the comprehensive plan, I would start, and I did start at Forest Park, by going through these goals. And I see that they want to enhance community and civic space by preserving and regenerating natural environments. A farm stand code that allows people to sell produce when they're already growing it sustainably helps achieve that goal. Let them know that. Paint that picture specifically and tie it back to their governing documents. And then create a unique sense of place in the region. I think that is a great goal that you might find in a lot of comprehensive plans. And it ties back to, local food can be hot and trendy. It's a lot of hot, hard work most of the time, but it can be hot and trendy. And a city that can put themselves on the map as being a sustainable ag supporter, a local food supporter, that's good publicity. That helps work with creating that unique sense of place in the region, of giving that shining example of thinking differently in terms of food. And there was a goal about establish new and expand existing small business services and programs. And it was a stretch of an argument, but it was an argument to say that this produce stand shows these students at Little Ones Learning Center how you can commoditize something and sell it and be enterprising. So it did have that piece to that small section of the community, but having a farm stand ordinance that would allow other education centers to do something similar allows Little Ones to set an example and to build this goal that the city has of establishing new and expanding existing small business services at a different level that they may not have even touched or thought of yet. So looking through this comprehensive plan gives you the ability to take what you're communicating to folks who are outside of this local food bubble and tie it to their goals to be able to facilitate being on the same page and seeing where this is a win-win to adopt codes that support local food and sustainable farming. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. I think I only have a couple more slides, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A again. Yeah, this last substantive slide is about negotiating code language. And I will start this slide off with saying that negotiation is a skill. It is like a muscle. It needs to be worked out. It can be worked out. You can get stronger in it. If you've set down the negotiation weights for a long time, pick them back up slowly, but negotiation is a skill. It's worth thinking about if you haven't, and if you are already a good negotiator, that can and should be shared in community with the rest of local food folks. Having strong negotiators in a community in general sets that community up in a strong infrastructure way. So when you're negotiating code language, when you realize I can't run the operation I want to run because of this local zoning code, or it's not there, or it's there but it doesn't allow exactly what I need, then this is where you land in negotiating that code language. And there are so many resources on the internet for municipal code language in support of sustainable ag, urban livestock, farm stands, markets, beekeeping. There's lots of resources for code language around those things. Most of them come from clinics in law schools and in public health schools and community planning. A lot of those different schools around the nation have this particular focus on sustainable ag. They do put out example code language. It's a great place to start. And then other local codes are a resource for language as well. For instance, Tucker is a municipality that used to just be unincorporated DeKalb. And at first, they didn't have anything in their code about keeping chickens. So using the DeKalb code made sense when they finally did adopt the zoning ordinances. They rolled in DeKalb's, then it changed a little bit, I think. But it made sense to use DeKalb's because Tucker was located in that jurisdiction. The culture, the nuance of the neighborhoods and the communities was similar. So it made sense to kind of draw on that code to create Tucker's, for example. But keep in mind that other local code may be the result of negotiations that have already happened in that jurisdiction. So there may have been more of an ask in that original code, but then it was narrowed down as it was negotiated between the sustainable ag folks and the local government folks. And there may have been a lot carved out of that. So just keep that in mind when you're pulling code language from another code. Your code could start off bigger and grander. When you first offer code language, if you have the opportunity to do so, include everything that would work best for your novel enterprise in the best case scenario. For instance, allowing a farm stand to run 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or whatever works for you, until the city decides, well, no, let's narrow down those hours to make sure it doesn't cause traffic issues or something else that's on their radar that's not on sustainable ag folks' radar. That's we all got to come to the same place. So offer code language that includes anything you would want in the best case scenario, and know ahead of time what you can bend on and what is a deal breaker. If you're negotiating and one of the things they want to change is something that changes your enterprise again, dig your heels in. And this goes to the next point, dig your heels in. But when you're actively negotiated in those discussions where they're trying to take out the pieces that are, trending towards deal breakers, listen more than you talk. hear the worries, hear the concerns, because there's usually a lot more in common with those same vibes than we give credit for automatically. But hear those worries and concerns, and then use what you know about your endeavor and what you know about the benefits and what you know about the realities and the practicalities of doing it, and help provide assurances that will still get you what you need at the end of the day. Like, just listen to those worries and then keep your education and your arguments going. In each part of the process of dealing with local government and changing code, you will get new questions. You will get new arguments against what you're doing. So keep track of those from the first call you make to City Hall to ask about starting the process. If you explain what you're doing and the admin that you're talking to asks you about, well, you're not allowed to do that already? Boom, write that down, keep track of it. Because when you finally get in front of the mayor and city council, if you keep track of each conversation along the way, you're going to have this huge opportunity for educating and making solid arguments when you get to city council. And rally support. Local government is a super fun place to, maybe fun is not the word, but fun is the word. It's a fun place to be able to show up in support of a cause. So get everyone to wear green t-shirts or green hats or, something blue and green to look like the earth. Have everyone look uniform that's there in support of what you're doing. Get everyone to come. One more practical tip kind of from a grassroots to translating to city council tip is that you only get a short amount of time to speak in favor of something like a zoning ordinance change. So make sure you know who the leadership is in this grassroots rallying that you've done. Who is the leader who has that strong background of story and arguments? Put them in the front of the line of speaking, but have folks stand up. I mean, it's a cool place to be able to rally and gain energy and even get the local media involved and really show up and affect some change. So rally support around what you're doing too, and show up with that support and with that confidence to get it changed, because you know why. It's just a matter of letting the city council know why and the mayor know why it makes sense to do what you're trying to do. Yeah, that was my last substantive slide. So I'm going to go ahead. I don't see any chat questions. Does anybody have any questions that have come up in that section? Awesome. The takeaways from tonight that I want you all to go home with is that local government affects all businesses. All businesses are required to pay attention to the local government rules. Local laws must be in line with Georgia's Constitution and local planning documents like the comprehensive plan. If a property is not zoned for a specific use, it is not legal as a use. And personal agreements like contracts and HOAs may further refine how a property is allowed to be used, even beyond the zoning code itself. And local government is in place to serve you. There is room for change in the local government. And just remember that if you're doing something novel and it's not there yet, your local government is a great place to start in shaping it to reflect what it is that its constituents are doing, what it is that is going on in the community, and hold them accountable for that. I did get a direct question. Does beekeeping typically require a separate code for an existing community garden? Let's see. Is that in the city of Atlanta? Just curious. Okay. I'd have to look back at the urban gardening code more closely to remind myself of beekeeping and how it falls in there. in some codes, beekeeping is listed right along with community garden issues. And in some, it might be a separate issue. Community gardens may have been tackled in one zoning ordinance, and then in another, they tackled beekeeping specifically. It's so common that even the cutting edge leadership risks that municipalities take in showing up for sustainable ag, they happen kind of piecemeal sometimes as issues are brought up. Like, we have a community garden, but now it would make a lot of sense to have a beekeeping opportunity here to help pollinate our garden. The connection is immediately seen by someone who grows food regularly and knows that, but it may not be seen in the process of making those changes. So sometimes it's a separate issue. Sometimes they come together in the code to look through that. And I think that separate code for existing community gardens is the perfect segue into talking about the office hours. Like I said in my disclaimer that I did not give legal advice tonight. Legal advice is nuanced and it depends on your specifics, and it involves sitting down and thinking through things and asking questions and getting to the core of what's going on. So I could not give legal advice tonight, but I can in an office hour. We can work together in the office hour in a working consultation, and in an hour, it's totally possible to get some clear answers, get some clear starts on document formation or document interpretation. They're very valuable. And because of the Food Well Alliance's support of the Law Farm, if your farm operation is in Clayton, Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, or Gwinnett counties, office hours are completely free for you to sign up for and use with me. So if you are running a farm operation in Clayton, Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, or Gwinnett, and you have something going on in this realm of issues, anything about tax, any of the questions that came up tonight that I didn't have answers to are great questions for office hours. And then I love pulling out of folks what else is going on. So you may come to office hours with one specific question, but we'll talk for a little while and realize you have another legal low-hanging fruit piece that we can work on and get shored up for you in that hour or maybe in another hour. So please use them. And then if you're outside these counties, and even if you're outside the farming realm, if you're a Georgia farmer, Georgia food entrepreneur, or a Georgia entrepreneur in general, and I do stick to Georgia. If you're outside of Georgia, I'm not licensed to practice law outside of Georgia. So if you're in Georgia and you're on this webinar right now, I'm offering these office hours to webinar participants for $75, which is a huge discount. To spend this hour with me in a working consultation context like it is usually costs $250. If you're on this webinar tonight, you can have that same time with an attorney, get some answers for $75, huge discount. Please use it. I want to make sure that folks feel confident in what they're doing and that they are doing it as right as they possibly can. That's what I'm here for. And you can always email me at michelle@thelawfarm.com if you are unsure how to use Calendly, if you're confused about even getting started with the office hours, shoot me an email. I would love to be in touch with any of y'all moving forward. And that's it for me tonight. Are there any final questions or things that you'd like to bring up for future webinars or anything on anybody's mind before we wrap up? Well, it's been my pleasure to share this information. I hope it has prompted some questions. I hope to see y'all signing up for some office hours. Y'all are so welcome. And sign up for next September's webinar is going to be touching on intellectual property issues. So it's another great webinar for farmers, food entrepreneurs, and just entrepreneurs in general, talking about intellectual property. And then the next month is going to be those conservation tax benefits. And then the next month is just business law 101. So please sign up for the next webinars. And I'm so glad that y'all made it out tonight. I really appreciate you being here. Please be in touch if you have questions. Bye, guys.
Bye. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.